Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Jeremy Nathan here and Logan Hillard as we take you on this journey of Azure security. And this is just an introductory class. We also teach full day classes with Excel, PowerPoint, and getting into beginning cybersecurity, and also a 3-day class of the Azure cybersecurity class here. So just email us if you want us to send you these outlines. Just let us know. And let me go back up to the beginning here. Yeah, just email us. We'll send us this PDF, and we'll get started with. And just a little bit about me. I'm a technical trainer. I've been teaching since 2015. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, MCT, from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Here's my email, LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me and Logan. You visit our websites. And yeah, Logan, I'll let you introduce yourself here.
Yep. Hello, guys. My name is Logan Hillard. I'll be also presenting to you today as a team with JN Training. My company as a small business owner is LNGIT. We operate in the MSP and technical training as well as consultation spaces. And my background is I officially started with networking and then somehow found my way to pen testing. And now I'm looking at Azure security, GRC, and a couple of other more business specific security stuff. All right, so that's my background there. Cool. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to just knock them out in chat, and we can answer in the moment. Or if it's a little more detailed, I'll just let you know that we'll talk at the end. We'll have a little bit of time after class, so after the entire 1 hour, we'll stick around for a little bit. If you guys have questions, just want to have a conversation, we're gonna give you guys some time for that as well. Okay. All right, this is going to be the class timeline. It is going to be really quick. We only have 1 hour, so we're going to touch as much as we possibly can in that hour. First section is mostly going to be a lot of why, because we don't have time for a lot of how. Okay, so it's going to be, why are we doing Azure security? What's the point of this? What do these tools do? And what does this bring? Okay, Jordan, this one today is free, but additional training does come with cost. All right, we can talk about that later after class. Okay. Right. So why Azure Defender? Why Sentinel? Why Azure at all? Right. As an organization, right? If you go out into the field, or even as a technician who's trying to figure out, why I would want to get into this field, Azure Security Solutions and Azure just in general has the backing of one of the largest organizations on the planet in the cyber industry. Right? Microsoft, say what you will about the company, and again, we're not Microsoft consultants here. Say what you will about them, but they have one of the best cyber programs on the planet. Not only is their cyber on point, but they are also one of the best big data machine learning companies and organizations on the planet. So when you add those two things together, they are a powerhouse in the space. All right. That does come with cost, and that is one of the biggest negatives to this entire package. But again, as an organization, that is a decision that they have to make for themselves. Not only is that first piece brilliant, right? It's like, okay, I get access to the best stuff on the planet, essentially, in terms of the cyber realm. I mean, they compete with people like CrowdStrike, Cylance, and things like that. It's also extremely easy to implement. So if anyone has ever gone through the process of rolling out or onboarding devices for this type of cybersecurity solutions, this is much easier than that. Literally a few buttons, and you can actually roll out onboarding to entire resource groups. So instead of just like a couple endpoints at a time, clicking through a manual process, you can say, point at resource group, add onboarding, and boom, it'll just install the agent on all of the machines in Azure. And there's also additional automation utilities for on-prem. So this covers every device essentially. Some devices are not covered, like mobile devices, but there are other solutions for that. All right. Basically, if it has REST API, it can handle it. if you are looking to become a part of a SOC, or if you're trying to help an organization understand if they need one, this is a great way to kind of sell that idea. Is Azure and all these security solutions in Azure allow you to build out a SOC anywhere in the world, basically as soon as you're ready, right? And to be fair, even further, not only can you build it out, but you can spin it down for specific instances, or maybe for budgetary reasons. You could spin up and spin down resources and the security solutions that go with them when necessary, as well as connecting to other CSPs, cloud service providers like AWS and Google. All right, so one of the big questions, and again, we're focusing on the why from an organizational standpoint, because this part is really important. It's like, why would we use Azure? Why wouldn't I use Cylance or CrowdStrike or Carbon Black or Sentinel One? Why wouldn't I use, an MSSP to actually handle my SOC setup, right? Why wouldn't I just hire some other company? Well, it's going to cost more money, right? Hiring the people is actually really expensive too. The time that they spend, dealing with your product. So if the budget is a problem, right? One of the main questions that I would pose to any organization from that perspective is, how much does it cost for you to be down? Because that's how you're going to determine your return on investment. If you're spending X amount of money for these Azure security products, but it costs you Y amount to be down, does that make sense, right? And we may say, well, it's never going to happen to us, right? Well, that is, in this day and age, we know that to not be true. It is not a fact, or I guess it is a fact, that you will be attacked, no matter what the organization, no matter the size, no matter the complexity, by either the lowest level of attacker all the way up to the highest level of attacker. And it's only a matter of when, not if. Okay, so the budget kind of speaks for itself. You determine your ROI and you say, can we afford that, right? That's essentially how that goes. The other question would be, well, maybe we can't do this 24/7. There are vendors specifically dedicated for only that nighttime part. So if you're like, okay, well, we have 9 to 5 employees, we can't handle after hours, we have people to support that. There are vendors that are very interested in doing that service for you. And then you may say, well, we don't have the infrastructure for this. We don't have the automation tools. We don't have anything set up. We don't have anyone that knows automation. Azure supports that entire part of the product. Implementation, onboarding, even the maintenance aspect, Azure covers all of it from top to bottom. Anyone's been on the organization side knows how much of a headache some of that is. The last part is no corporate appetite. So let's imagine that you're part of an organization and corporate's like, no, $0. That's how much you get for security. All right. Well, that's back to point one. It's about being able to explain, well, what is your ROI? It may be true. Your organization may not be able to afford Azure security products, right? They're quite expensive. But in terms of ease of use and in terms of how easy it is to onboard and secure and monitor plenty of different hybrid on-prem cloud environments, different cloud environments. It is one of the easiest platforms to utilize in that regard. So sometimes that extra cost is because of that ease of use. All right. This second question, if it's not a budget related question, it's a time related question. Where does this come into play? When am I going to have the time to do all of this? Well, if you're thinking about cyber, if you're in an organization, if you get hired, or if you're already working for an organization now and you are thinking about cyber, that is what we're talking about today, right? It may not even be just that you're thinking about cybersecurity, but you may also be thinking about cloud. How do we perform security? And we also have these other questions of how do we move to the cloud? What's nice about Azure and its security products is that it kind of marries those two concepts together. So if you're looking to get into cloud and your organization wants to be secure, Azure provides all of that all at the same time. And cybersecurity, if you want to move to the next slides here, cybersecurity fundamentals is really where you start. These are the basics, right? Usability versus security, getting corporate on board, making updates, performing backups, user training, better AV. These are all the stuff that we know about and we should be doing, right? Azure covers that, obviously, right? The next step here with our defense in depth mindset, right? This is really where we want to be. If your organization is not here, you need to be working on getting to this point. And this is an idea or a concept of defending at every level. You don't just defend at the WAN. You don't just defend at the firewall. You don't even just defend at the endpoints with EDR. You spend even a little bit more time, right? You monitor everything, data, right? Access, privileges, time-related access. You do the entire gambit in order to make sure that you're not being attacked. And if you do get attacked, that you can properly respond. Okay? So the first step for defense in depth mindsets is start monitoring now. You cannot defend what you can't see. All right. Normally I don't like to read from slides, but that is a truism in cyber. If you can't see it, you cannot defend against it. All right. So monitoring is a crucial aspect, and that's again what a lot of these Azure products are for. Hiring pen testers, if you're like, hey, we're compliant, we're good. Everyone says, hey, check that box, we're compliant. You need someone that knows, right? If you don't know, you need to hire an expert, and that's really what that's about. Relying on compliance to keep your organization secure is not a good idea. Azure helps with that part too. And then it's again, if you're in cyber, not only do you set up the tools, but you have to maintain them. It's not just about build and then forget. It's not that easy. You have to keep monitoring and maintaining. I saw so many scenarios real world where I had a machine, or I had a client that built out a tool and just let it go to waste, and it was never effective. That type of tool is not going to help you from a cybersecurity standpoint. You have to constantly maintain. Azure helps with that too. Okay. And of course, the holy grail that everyone is leading up to is zero trust, right? Everyone is talking about zero trust. Everyone wants to be in a zero trust mindset, framework, policy, organization, but this is not easy, right? However, if you're working towards that, and technically everyone is working towards it, whether or not you know it, whether or not you are talking about it, if you care about cyber, you are working towards zero trust. This is really where Azure can really come into play and help you get to that point much, much faster. It provides everything that Zero Trust is basically concerned about, from a top-down organizational perspective all the way through. All resources can be basically set up in a zero trust mentality from the get-go. You can also make changes drastically across the entire organization with a few clicks. Azure security solutions help you get to zero trust, and it's going to cost you quite a bit of money. Okay, it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost time. It's going to be dedicated resources. There's going to be a timeline, a budget. It's going to be a whole process, but Azure Security can help you kind of make that a little bit simpler. This is really where everyone is heading, and Azure Security products can help us get there. Now, let's start talking about some of the threats that you guys may be seeing real world. All right, and just to kind of get a little bit of interaction here, who has been in a scenario where you were actively engaged in incident response? Who has seen basically a show of hands? Who has seen an attack like real world against an actual target? Show of hands. Okay, Tracy, nice. Anybody else? Jeremy, have you seen one real world?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I have.
Cool. Okay, so if you've been in that scenario, it can be pretty terrifying because it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of things happening. People are very stressed, right? A lot of stuff going on. These are the types of scenarios that Azure is best at. The first, random phishing incidents, that's like spam filtering, very basic stuff. That's blocked by like 365 email rules, right? Targeting phishing is a little bit different, right? Being able to spoof emails and kind of move into social engineering users, that's a little bit better, but still is more about user training, right? So Azure really comes in at level 3. Azure's really designed, these security solutions we're going to talk about today are really designed to prevent and mitigate opportunistic attackers and script kiddies. Right, so a script kiddie is just someone who is just using stuff online. They don't really understand what they're doing. They're just doing, right? Opportunistic attackers are using things that are real world that happened maybe recently and using to attack your environment, right? So that could be a 0 day. It could be something that's a few months old. Whatever it is, an opportunistic attacker is really where the attack is really more complex, and you have to be monitoring to stop or even attempt to mitigate in the first place. Even further, levels 4 and 5, where you have targeted attackers and nation states, you really need to be on your game. If you're not a Fortune 500 company performing a zero trust organizational setup top to down with nothing missing, no oversight, you're not having resources that are just over here in the ether, you're not going to be able to defend against a nation state, period. So if you're worried about that, or even worried about targeted attackers and these opportunistic attackers, which that is probably maybe 10 to 20% of all attacks, the rest is targeted phishing and random phishes. Um, these main attack types, this is how you defend against them, is the tools that we're going to be talking about today. Okay. Um, and one of the biggest, this is kind of like a side threat, it's a different way that the threat can happen, is an insider threat, right? A lot of us know that insider threats today are a really big concern, okay? And the reason for that is they already have access, right? An attacker is external. They don't have access to your environment. But from the inside, an attacker can do a whole lot more damage. And it doesn't just mean that you hired someone that was malicious. They could actually be a good, virtuous person, but when you give someone access to something, they have the ability or maybe the potential to flip for a variety of reasons. It could be blackmail, it could just be payment, it could be maybe they turned, it could be for some cause, right? Regardless of that reason, as an organization, you need to be able to defend against this. This is not inherent in any networking solution or anything like that. Even with something like Active Directory, that doesn't just come by default. So you need additional monitoring for user accounts on top of that. And that's where IAM and PIM come into play, more policy related content. And what DLP is actually, DLP was created specifically to defend against essentially your Edward Snowdens, your high risk internal insider threats that can steal your data and exfiltrate it to the internet or sell it or something like that. Okay, so these are some of those insider threat mitigation techniques that are built into Azure. Okay. So we're going to be talking about a couple solutions here. You can see 365 Azure AD, sometimes shortened to AAD, Azure Monitor, which is actually the underlying service that kind of culminates or kind of runs all of these tools. Defender, which is more of your SIM, your cloud SIM, also could be described as an EDR solution, endpoint detection and response. And then you also have Sentinel, which is a little bit more interesting, where it's more of a cloud threat hunting platform, as well as a SOAR platform, which is essentially automation of remediations, right? So not only are you monitoring, but you are automating the monitoring and linking that up with a remediation technique to fix the problem so that your SOC analysts don't even have to do anything. They just come in behind and they say, yep, that's good. And then Purview, which this is actually a newer tool that is just I think it's out of preview now, or Purview preview, right? I think it's out of preview now, and Purview is your compliance aspect. So if you're worried about compliance, which if you're a large organization, that's what they're talking about, right? It's kind of where a lot of people start. Purview is a fantastic utility for making sure that your data and your policies are compliant. Okay. A lot of the questions that come with these tools are, how do I get access to this? And this is almost always a question of licensing. The main way that you get access to all of these tools is E5, Microsoft E5, and you'll be good to go. That'll provide almost all the security features that we're going to talk about today. There will be additional costs on top of that for all of the features. However, in order to gain access to them, you have to have that initial license. Okay, so E5 is kind of where people start or like to go to just get access to everything. But there are some other options. If you want to talk more specifically about your scenario, we can talk about that after class, and we'll provide you some links. Okay. All right, and now we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty. So what is IAM, right? In Identity Access Management, this is essentially basically Active Directory in the cloud. So it is going to be performing authentication and giving privilege, right, which would be authorization for those of you that are following along the AAA or the IAAA from Sec Plus and other organizations. Authorization of what you have access to, the privileges that user has, is what IAM is all about. And essentially, if you want to break it down, it's like making sure all your users aren't global admin. Right? That is a key component to security. You don't want global admins just running around everywhere. You want to follow the concept of least privilege, right? So if I'm giving privileges to Jeremy from my environment, right, I don't necessarily want him to do everything. Maybe I'm just giving him access to create new users. Well, there is a role specifically dedicated to that in Azure, and it has a lot of these already built out, a lot of these default rules, and of course you can customize, right? You can build whatever you need, and this is really the definition, the bare bones of Azure AD, and sometimes it's also known as RBAC because it's really granular use of those user rights and privileges, right? So PIM, this one's a little bit interesting because you'll hear IAM and PIM come up a lot, but a lot of people don't differentiate between them. In Azure, PIM is specifically an E5 licensed product, and it is more of a management utility for access. Whereas IAM is more about giving you access to something specific, like maybe giving you access to being able to build virtual machines. PIM is more about, well, what time of day are we allowed to do that? Right? If I wanted to block users from accessing after 5 p.m. because we work at a bank and nobody works after 5 p.m., I can very easily do that with PIM, with the PIM utility. Okay. Not only that, but it also provides a secondary piece, which I thought was really important to bring up here, is this idea of approval. Not only can users access or request access for privileges, but even further, they can provide justification for that request. So normally this is just done via an email or a call or something like that, not something that is very easy to track. All of that is trackable and built into the platform. Okay, so PIM actually allows you to kind of track that from a management perspective, which is brilliant when you're talking about user rights. Oftentimes, organizations just give out user rights all over the place, and they have no idea why anyone has anything. The justification is a big part of preventing that problem. All right. And now the dreaded MFA, right? I know most people probably know what multi-factor authentication is, and a lot of us probably don't like it or are not really a big fan, but I'm telling you, it's probably one of the most important things that we're going to talk about today, and I'll just be straight with you. It blocks almost every type of attack. If you have MFA enabled on a service, and I, as a hacker, am trying to gain access to that service, it increases the complexity probably more than tenfold. It makes it where an attacker's not even interested in attempting to bypass it. That's how difficult it can be. It's extremely time consuming and can annoy users, so you need to be aware of that if you're trying to implement something like MFA. Of course, MFA comes with Azure, right? That's why we're talking about it. But the way to handle this is to implement it now and to solve the problem of time consumption and annoying of users after the fact. Okay, that's how it's done. It needs to be implemented ASAP so that you can start preventing attacks. It is extremely potent as a security solution across the board. The only thing that I would hesitate to say is please don't use push notifications. That is the easiest type of MFA to bypass for hackers, and that's what we're looking for. Something called what is it? MFA fatigue or alert fatigue. Basically, I can send you request after request after request, and eventually you will allow me through. Okay, so we don't want that. All right. Now, this is kind of the nitty gritty. We're getting into some of the more security aspect of Azure, and one of the first things is called Azure AD sign-in logs, really, and your audit logs. This is really basic. All right, if anyone has any Linux background or even Windows background, you know that logs are central to cyber, right? To security. If you can't see what happens, how do you even know it happened to begin with? That's what a log provides you. It provides you that access to that data so that you can know that it happened at all, right? This is available with all Office subscriptions. You only need access to the apps, and it will still provide you these sign-in logs. I have used these sign-in logs to personally help mitigate and resolve an incident during a live incident response. We were getting logins from a different country, and it was happening at like 3 a.m., and it was very obvious that it was not one of the users in the organization. And we were able to determine who that was and also block their IP address just from these sign-in logs. Okay, all that is built into Azure. So fundamentally, that's what you get out of the gate if you're not purchasing E5 or anything like that. All right. Now remember, the big part of this is if you are worried about logs, if you're worried about reading logs, you need to keep the logs, right? And that's called retention. If you don't have the logs, there's nothing to read. So long term, if you're like, well, let's say that I want to make sure that if we get this meeting is muted. Hey, we just got a setting thing at the top. This meeting chat is muted. Want to make sure that's not a problem.
Oh, I think it's okay.
Okay.
Not sure what that is.
Just check on that for me. So the retention for the logs is extremely important because it's just like the same thing. If you're not monitoring, you can't see it. If the retention doesn't include the attack, because maybe it took you 60, 90, 120 days to respond to that attack, then if your retention does not equal that length, then you won't have access to those logs. And it is possible to archive those logs in Azure or on-prem long term, so you can actually perform analysis on an attack that may have happened 6 months, 9 months ago. But just realize that, you know, if you're monitoring, it doesn't mean you see it immediately. You may only see it a few months out. According to the FBI in 2019, they performed a study, and most organizations don't see the attack for an average of 6 months. Okay, so most of those organizations don't have any monitoring built in at all. So if you had this Azure implementation, you probably would not. It probably wouldn't take you 6 months to realize that was happening. Okay. Okay, so we're going to look at the Azure AD portal to just check out the sign-in logs, and we're going to hit this directly in the browser. And what I want you guys to kind of note is that what's nice about Azure is that we can give you guys a link, and you can save it as a little bookmark, and it will work for your environment. That link doesn't have any authentication or anything tied into it, so you can actually access your environment with those links. They work cross-tenant, and it'll just be your data, right? Which is awesome. So this is kind of what the sign-in logs look like, and it's very basic, right? It's like, hey, where did you sign in from? Where's it coming from? What was the application? Who was the user account? What was the time? Right, all the stuff that we care about, and whether or not it was multi-factor, right? So you can actually dive into, hey, who is using MFA? Do we have any users that aren't using MFA? Maybe we should check into that. If you have a user coming in from a different country, hey, that looks anomalous. Maybe we need to block that or look into that IP address or call that user and say, hey, was that you? So really basic cyber concepts can be actually be performed just from this really simple sign-in log, right? You can yeah, obviously specify based off the IP address, the location, or the time. And if you click on the little date icon there, where it says last 24 hours above user sign-ins and interactive, and you can see, so his retention is actually 30 days, and he can set it to just 24 hours, 1 week, or 30 days by default, and it will pull all the data for you. But that is only because his license supports that retention. If you go in and you try to do that with like a standard 365 license, you may only have 7 days of retention. Okay, so the license actually kind of contributes to how long you can keep those logs for. Okay. All right, and again, just post questions if you got them, and I will respond to them real time. Okay. Cool. Back to the slides. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're getting into the next product here, and this is really the first kind of cyber security product that we're going to be talking about. This is called Microsoft 365 Defender. Now, just realize that this name changes a lot. It is not like this one thing. It will change over and over again. Even recently, it was known as a different name. I think it was, I think at one point it was Azure Defender. But just realize that this may change in the future. Okay, the way I would describe Defender generally is it is the SIM aspect. It is the cloud event management product for your organization in Azure. And of course, it supports a lot of different options like apps, app control. It supports endpoints, obviously. It supports data policies as well. It supports a lot of different things. And Microsoft 365 Defender is kind of like the parent to that. It's basically all of those solutions wrapped into one. And this is really your SIM product. It's how you see alerts. It's how you respond to incidents. It's what your SOC analysts would be interacting with most of the time. Yes, and you can see if you've seen a real world organization, they will have those Azure AD logs and lots of random people logging in. That's people trying to brute force accounts, right? You can block that. Okay, you can actually block that automatically with tools like Defender and Sentinel, and we'll talk about a little bit of that here in a second. Okay, so one of the major solutions underneath Defender is Defender for Endpoint, and this is probably what you guys are more familiar with, is the antivirus portion of Defender, and that's what we're talking about here. This is really to kind of put it in perspective. Antivirus is something that just blocks things like hashes, right? So you move a malicious file onto the hard drive, the AV reads the hash of that file and says, is this malicious or not? And then it blocks it. EDR is a whole nother level. It's like antivirus on steroids. And that's what Defender for Endpoint is all about. It will not only look for those obvious malicious files that get loaded onto devices and moved onto machines, but it will also look to try to defend against anomalous and behavioral analytic type of attacks. This is basically a mitigation against 0 days. That's if you're looking to mitigate 0 days, think EDR. Okay, that is the tool that you're looking for, and that is called Defender for Endpoint in Azure. It is very easy to roll out. There are automated processes and manual processes, and it supports Windows, Linux, and Mac up to 13. All right, so that is a large variety of this is almost every device, especially in a corporate environment, except your mobile devices. And there are solutions for that, like Intune, but we're not necessarily going to be covering those today because they're not specifically cyber products. Okay. What it's really doing there is looking for IOCs, and IOC is just an indicator of compromise, again, like a hash or an IP address, and it can wrap all those together, and each individual alert may only be a low criticality, but when combined into an incident, it may say, hey, this is a full attack chain. This is an actual real world attack. You need to look into this. That's what Defender is all about. It helps those SOC analysts respond quickly. Right? And so we have a couple other really cool solutions. This one is called Safe Links and Safe Attachments. It used to be called ATP because it was basically like email threat protection. And this is one of the main methodologies to prevent that second attack type. Remember, we talked about random phishing and then targeted phishing. Safe Links and Safe Attachments is your go-to utility to prevent those types of attacks, because they do things like URL scanning, which is actually quite basic, but mail flow review and time of click verification is paramount because of the attack types that have happened real world. It's not just at the moment that the URL is bad. It's what is that URL 3 days from now, right? That is why this is super important to be checking those URLs every time someone clicks it. That is what Safe Links is doing. Same thing with attachments. It's not just that first download, it's the second, the third, the fourth download. And of course, that information gets shared across your environment. And you actually get shared that information across all tenants because of Azure. Okay? Now, Defender for Cloud, this one's going to be pretty quick, but basically, if anyone's ever heard of a CASB or a Cloud Access Security Broker, that can help provide additional layers of authentication, maybe for third-party consultants or things like that. That is called Defender for Cloud Apps, and it is now actually integrated in Defender as of like 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. It also helps you identify application usage to see who's using what, to see if we need to mitigate some of that. Maybe someone's using something they shouldn't be, and as well as cloud discovery for finding additional assets. This is known as policy control and sanctioning of applications in Azure, and that's what this tool is all about. All right, now we're going to look at a real attack type in Defender to show you kind of what a SOC analyst would see real world. We're not going to do a super deep dive. We're just going to talk about it generally, so that we can, so that we can actually check to see what a SOC analyst would be doing. Because one of my first questions when I was getting into this content was, well, what is it? Let me see the actual, right? There's a lot of like prep work to like understand what it is and what it does, but really I want to see specifically what the SOC analyst would be looking at. And this would start with the home page, right? There's a lot of things going on here. You don't need to know everything right now, but some of the main pinpoints, one of the things I want to talk about is this secure score here on the left. Microsoft Secure Score is basically, for those of us who are not really technical or have a pen testing or red teaming background or anything like that, the Microsoft Secure Score essentially is a bunch of rules and concepts and ideals that you should be trying to follow according to Azure. And not only does it allow you to say, hey, this thing is really good for you to do, but it also tells you how to do it. And even further, so some of those things are literally one click and Azure just automates that across your environment. Okay, so it depends on what it is specifically about how it happens, and there's a lot of information that goes with each of these things. But your secure score can be something that you could slowly creep up. And additionally, as a blue teamer or red teamer, purple teamer, whatever you're doing, whichever side of the fence you're on in terms of this cyber side, you can use your secure score to prove that you are making the environment more secure. This is from Microsoft, okay? And everyone can say what they will about Microsoft, but they know what they're talking about, okay? They have good engineers, some of the best. Trust me, I know some of them. So if you're talking about elevating your secure score and you can get this security score to maybe 75%, you're going to be in a more secure scenario, right? Your environment will be more secure, period. And you can show that off in a presentation or whatever to C-levels. All right, let's take a look at incidents here. And I want to show you basically what an attack actually looks like. This is an incident which includes a bunch of different alerts that we're going to click into here. And I'm going to request control here, Jeremy, just in case I need to click around. But this is basically a multi-stage incident that includes a lot of different attack types. What's funny is that some of them, like this one here, this enumeration of files with sensitive data, is actually considered a low. In Azure, the yellow is a low vulnerability or risk. And that actually means that, not a big problem. But combined with some of the other attack types and the other alerts in this incident, it can show you that, hey, this is actually a bigger issue than you maybe potentially realized. And you can kind of see generally what they are, and you can click into them. So this one is a big one, right? Possible reverse shell. This means that an attacker is trying to gain access to the system remotely at a terminal level, right? They're trying to gain access to that command prompt or that terminal on Linux. And you can see everything about this. It does a super deep dive on what is actually occurring, what the box was, what the user account was, the service that was running, the process ID, the timing, everything that a SOC analyst would need to determine what happened, when it happened, and how to properly recognize it and respond to this in the future is all dedicated here in the Defender platform. Okay, this is what your SOC analyst would be looking at. And this is a real world attack. I actually brute forced the machine, found the credentials, and then gained access to it, and then elevated my privileges and sent myself a reverse shell. Okay, so that is a real attack type, and Defender was able to understand all of that and analyze and turn all of that into a single incident that you can then respond to. And an analyst may be a junior level position. We may not all be technical here in this call. All right, you may just be starting out. Maybe you want to get started into something like this in the future. You would be implementing, or you would be interacting with this platform right here, and you might just be saying, well, I don't know if this is real. You might be making a determination. You might be saying, hey, I think this looks bad. This looks real bad. Based off of my Google searches, this looks like it's a problem. This platform, right, Defender, allows you to not only classify the interaction, right, say that, hey, this is definitely a true positive, someone needs to look at this, but you can then assign it, which is in this case would be essentially known as escalation. You could escalate this to someone else. And of course, this has to do with privileges. Managers can escalate or push these alerts and incidents to other SOC analysts and things like that. And what's awesome is that not only do you get that availability of like being to say, hey, I need support. This is real. Hey, this is an incident. Let's go. We need to respond to this now. It allows you to do all that across a cloud environment, on different sides of the world, but it also gives you a lot of detail on the actual attack type. So anyone who is worried about, say, like a government organization, or maybe someone who really cares about security, MITRE is one of the main MITRE is one of the main organizations that you care about whenever you start talking about attack techniques. And these attack techniques are already classified in Defender. And you can turn this into a presentation. You can take this back to what's known as MITRE attack and actually do a deep dive on not only what this attack is immediately from the portal, but you can also look at other examples of that attack type and say, hey, are we able to defend against all of these types of attacks? And that starts to get you into more of that proactive mindset, which if you're not doing cybersecurity proactively, you're not doing it correctly. Okay. And we're not all there, but Azure Security can get you there quickly. Okay. And that is what Defender looks like in a nutshell. There's so much more to it, but this is really what you would be looking at from a SOC analyst perspective. All right. Hopefully that was nice. That is something that I really wanted to show because you can have so much detail there, and a lot of examples online will just show like fabricated fake data. But that was a real attack that I performed. I actually attacked that machine, and that's what it spit out, which is pretty cool. All right, now we're going to be talking about Sentinel. I know we're rushing through this. We only have so much time. Again, this is an introductory class, but Microsoft Sentinel is really this high level, more of an automated platform, also proactive, definitely a more proactive tool. Defender allows you to start thinking proactively, but Sentinel is really that next level. And of course, this is additional cost on top of all the other tools that we've talked about. So just be aware of that. It doesn't just come out of the container. You don't just get access to Sentinel, but it is a scalable cloud native solution that essentially is a orchestration, automation, and response platform known as SOAR. And a SOAR platform, what SOAR does is essentially allows you to automate remediation. That's the easiest way to explain that. The other side of that is threat hunting. That's what Sentinel is really good at. It allows you to look for incidents before they have been detected. So you are actually proactively scanning your environment, and not, again, because it's Azure and Defender and all these tools are built in, it's not just Azure, it's on-prem, it's AWS, it's GCP. You can use Sentinel with its data connectors to scan any environment, right? And it just inherently allows all of that. Of course, again, there's additional costs for data connectors and stuff like that. We'll talk about here in a second, but it allows all of that, which is great. Okay, allows you to respond and investigate. And this is kind of, that previous slide is kind of what Microsoft says, but this is kind of what I say. This is what I would say Sentinel is more about. It's more of a bird's eye view. It's not necessarily your SOC analyst. This would be more like a senior engineer. Think of like an automation security engineer. That's really what Sentinel is for, and allows you to perform a lot of SIM qualities, but has all of these additional qualities built into it. It has, again, all this integration with different data sources and everything like other CSPs. And that's really where Sentinel starts, is you start collecting data on a specific data source, and you say, hey, I want to monitor that. Okay, cool. Data connector for that location. Great. I want to visualize that data. Great. That's called working with workbooks in Sentinel. Okay, and you can enrich the data with visualization. Right? That's cool. All right. So the next step is analytics rules. This is actually utilizing machine learning to correlate alerts into incidents, and that can actually be a whole nother level. Like Defender's like this really basic, hey, something happened, that's one attack. Sentinel is like, if you have this data structure over here and this other data structure over here, and you happen to find this one set of data in both, that could potentially be an attack type that Defender did not see. And you can do that across environments, data platforms, endpoints, etc. So it's a much more like detailed look. It's a lot more complicated, in other words. The other side of this is the SOAR platform, and the SOAR platform utilizes what's known as playbooks. So you say, if you see this alert, respond like this. That is your automation. It's called a playbook. All right. So we have workbooks and playbooks. Okay. Workbooks is the enrichment of the data. Playbooks is the response to the data. And of course, there's another one called notebooks. And if you're performing threat hunting, you can actually utilize Jupyter notebooks written in Python to support your SOC analysts. Again, for automation concerns, right? If I want to do threat hunting every day and I just want to check for a lot of different things, or maybe I can actually create some Python script where I'm just like making very small adjustments and performing threat hunting constantly, that's also supported in Sentinel. Okay, so Sentinel is big, and we're going to talk about some really brief stuff here, okay? I'm going to keep this quick. You create Sentinel with a workspace, all right? You want to make sure retention is long. Next slide. All right. You then add Sentinel to that workspace. And once you're at this point, Sentinel is basically working, but you need to start ingesting data. All right. So next slide here as well. This is where we set up the data connector. So we say, once we have it set up, once we have the workspace in Azure Monitor, which is the underlying service, then we activate Sentinel. Now we add connectors to start importing or ingesting data into Sentinel. It doesn't just start reading everything by default. You have to tell it what to read because there is cost associated with that. Okay, so it's very specific. You can then utilize watch list to monitor priority assets. So let's say you have a bunch of domain controllers and you're really worried about those getting attacked. You can watch those specifically. There's something called alert fatigue. This is a really big concern when you start talking about a SOC. It's not just about, your SOC analyst getting tired. It's about they see too many of the same thing. And at some point, they start to say, it doesn't matter. And that is alert fatigue, okay? It can help remove that problem by allowing certain groups of assets to be watched and monitored more closely. And so, hey, if we have this alert across the entire environment, okay, not a big deal. But if we have an alert across this watch list, that's a bigger concern. It allows you to vary priority. Okay. And of course, they do a whole bunch of other stuff, but we're going to move on here. You can visualize data. It literally is exactly what it sounds like. It has a bunch of built-in workbooks already too. So you can say, hey, I have all this information, but no one's going to understand this except for me. I need to present workbooks. That's where that comes into play. Present to a C-suite. That's called workbooks in Sentinel. All right, you can also correlate alerts. This is kind of the analytics rule. There is something built in already that I do think is free at first for a trial, but then has to be paid for. It's called Fusion, and it is Microsoft's built-in machine learning algorithm. It is next. This is the thing that makes Sentinel so awesome. It can take lots of different information and understand it contextually, and that is where this alert comes into play. You can also create your own custom alerts based off of information you've seen, and again, it allows you to connect the dots between different data sources. Okay. Threat hunting is obviously its own thing. There's a lot of detail here. It's not simple to do this. Oftentimes things like Carbon Black or Cylance or CrowdStrike are really the go-to platforms for this. But threat hunting in Sentinel is the exact same thing. If you guys didn't know, they all use pre-built custo queries. And this is called KQL. All right. Some of them use their own syntax, but KQL is essentially a query language that allows you to threat hunt against all of your endpoints. Every data connector, every source of data in Sentinel can be queried with these KQL components. We're going to talk about that here in a second. All right. So, and again, this playbook methodology is, hey, all right, so I see this alert come in. I want to orchestrate that remediation so that my SOC analysts are just performing. They're not responding to incidents anymore, right? That's where we want to get. We're not responding anymore. We are following up. We are proactively validating that the response was the correct thing to do. So we see an alert come in. Sentinel allows us to automate that response to that alert or that incident and say, hey, if you see this happen, reset the user's password. Boom. Now we've taken all of the, this is actually help desk qualities, right? This is time that the help desk is going to be spending on this remediation. And now the help desk doesn't even have to do any of that work. You just have a SOC analyst coming in after the fact and saying that was the right move, or we need to change this remediation. Okay, so that is, I mean, in terms of time, that is your biggest winner by far. And these SOAR applications are extremely complicated and very detailed. Talk about, like, if you're rolling out SOAR, 6 months minimum. Sentinel makes that way easier. And I'm not just saying that. I promise. It's literally just like, oh, use this playbook, run playbook against environment, make sure your data connectors are set up, which you can, again, lots of different education on this product here for free. And it just starts working. And you could build the playbook with no code solutions using logic apps. So if you guys haven't heard of any of that, next level stuff, okay? Next level stuff. Let's go ahead and move on here. Okay, and I'm gonna leave this one up to Jeremy to handle.
Yeah, thanks, Logan.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, now we'll take a look at Microsoft Purview, and you'll see how all of these tie in together. And what Purview does is we'll scan all the data, like Logan was talking about. Could be from Google Cloud data, Amazon bucket data, Azure data, Oracle, SAP, anything. And it helps you protect your data using metadata and classifying the data. And so that's where it comes into the compliance role by categorizing that. And we'll look at that in just a minute. So we'll see how it scans the data. You scan all your sources, classify the data, search for data in Purview. And I'll show you. So it's really easy to set up, but it's very expensive, of course. So you just have to create a Purview account and that's it basically, and just start running it. So with this, like everything else, you need a Microsoft 365 E5 license, and we'll put in the chat that developer E5 license, or if Logan, if you want to drop that in the chat, that you all can get started with your own E5 license, and you can get a free Azure account. Well, it's not really free, but if you pay use a credit card, you get I think the first $200 for free to get started in Azure for yourself, just for practice. And so you can set policies in Purview, and you know, we have on the slides here, if you get error codes, what you need to do to register in Purview to get that started. So let's take a look also at a Purview demo. I'll put this in the chat that so this costs money, of course, but we ran this earlier, and you can get a data view of all your data, how your data is laid out. And let's go take a look at that in Azure. So right here is what it looks like. Let me go back to, here's the home page, your data catalog homepage, where you can browse for all of your assets, search for all of your data, and handle glossary of data, manage your terms, your business terms for what each column means, and to classify what those column titles actually mean. So there's a lot in here. If you look at the data map, here's how you can see, we see the root collection. That's the whole Purview collection here, is this this term here. And yeah, so that link that I put into chat, it's from Microsoft, so you can take a look at it. You just click deploy to Azure, set up a region, and what we suggest is you change the SQL admin login and make a password that's longer than 12 characters for that when you set this up. So, and what we suggest is making a new resource group, like let's say Purview resource group, just for this resource. And you want to delete it immediately, because we found this demo cost at least $13 per hour, just to let you know. So let me go back to that, to the data map. You can look at details of your data, like the Azure SQL database, to see detail, to look at every single column in this database, the whole collection here. And so here we can see each table. Oh, here's all the collections with all of the assets in that collection. So here we have a blob storage, and you can see how you can categorize this data easily, like by sales, by finance. Yeah, and any questions, just put them in the chat, let us know. There's a lot you can do with this, so this is real powerful. And like Logan was mentioning earlier with, let's look at, we'll look at Sentinel real quick. And what's nice is being able to bookmark these to find this. Like for example, let's go to Sentinel here, Sentinel resource group. I'm gonna go to overview to get into here. We'll go to our Sentinel workspace. It's a log analytics workspace. And let me get to that again here.
Yeah,
Okay,
this
let me
is
click
like
on
the
the Sentinel.
monitor, because everything is built on top of monitor, and that's what the workspaces are called.
Right. Yeah. And here, so here we see the Sentinel overview. This is what Logan was talking about. We see recent events. Security event is the #1 way that you can see what security, and that's the table called security event. So pretty simple. You know, clicking on it takes you into your log analytics, and this is the KQL. So if you're looking at the slides, this is going back to slide. Let's see where that's at. Back to basically slide 44 and 45 of where we had you download that. And you could get started with this. Let me put the log analytics link in here from this Azure demo into chat. 1 second here. So you all can practice with this. It's this is completely free. So this is a free log analytics demo. And what log analytics does is what Logan was mentioning earlier is everything comes back to, here, I'll go ahead and click, but I'll go back to this environment. Well, everything goes back to logs and querying every single log that happened. Like here for this example, we looked at those security events that were from Sentinel that brought us into the logs, and we can see what date they were. So we can click on time generated from newest to oldest in here. There we go. And you can open these up to see what the actual event was, what the time was, how many events happened at this time. And
you can kind of do like data analytics basically. So if we have like a bunch of security events from in one day, we could check to see, well, how many did we have yesterday? Why do we have more today? And that may point us in a specific direction of an attack.
Right. And to start typing the KQL, you just start typing. What's nice about the cloud environment, you get the IntelliSense, and I could just go down, click the down arrow to security event. The pipe is for each line, but if I do Shift Enter, you can run the whole table to see all the results. I think this gives us 30,000 results. You can export the results. You can save the queries. A lot you can do with this. And take a look at the other slides so you can see the specifics here. So like here, we'll look at, like, let's say we want to look at a specific computer here. So just go down to the next line, enter, type, where, and just type computer. And I'll just spell it out with the correct capitalization from that column, the two equal signs and quotes, and we'll put the Windows VM 2022-12 and run that to see only that computer, that machine.
Yeah, this is a live environment, so it is performing those checks against real logs all over the place, right? So it takes a little bit.
And there we go. So that's the one machine. You can export these. You can look at this in a chart. So really powerful data here. So we need to probably, it says that we need to break it down. It's always best to do it where first by time before, and let me share it. Let's go back to, I'll bring up the slides here to show that. So that's how you do the where. Here's other terms that you can look at with the reference, how to do an equals, not equals, real basic stuff. You can look how this compares to SQL. And so look, this brings up all the arguments. And yeah, like here's the time generate. You want to do the time generated first. So time generated first to limit your rows first before you see all the, it'll make it a lot quicker of a query. And there's other KQL that you can try out. You can do a visual, you can render by a chart. And sort and filter.
Yeah, and those pre-built KQL queries, that you have a lot. If you want to go back to one slide back,
oh, yeah, sure.
Those or just show it. Yeah, either way, the pre-built queries are like fundamental. Like you don't even have to really know any of this. You can learn it through the tool. It'll kind of teach you as you go. And of course, there's lots of resources online. But those pre-built KQL queries you can utilize straight out the box, right? So if you want to figure out performance, top 10 countries by traffic, network rules, IDS logs, threat intelligence logs, and you may not have data connectors to this location. So when you run the command, it may show nothing. High risk users, that's actually really cool. So we didn't get anything from that, but it might just be because we don't have the proper data connectors or anything like that. So it is specific. Sometimes they won't always work, but you can learn how to use the tool just by using the tool. Default queries. The IntelliSense really helps you out there. And just to be clear, all these Azure products are built on top of KQL queries, right? So this Azure Monitor workspace, this log analytics environment is basically what Sentinel is doing. It's what Defender is doing when it determines there's an alert. It's what Sentinel is doing when it creates an incident from alerts. It's just running KQL queries against these log files. and using some additional machine learning to spit out, hey, there's a potential attack here. Right? You see how much detail there is. You can go into databases, networking, security, VMs, workloads, performance, and that is just a lot of this. Actually, some of these things are actually built into the platform, and you don't even need Sentinel. That is more just like, do you have the data connector to actually read the data? Okay, and that's kind of what Sentinel does. Is it provides access to those data connectors. Okay.
Here, I'll stop the recording and see
Yeah.
see what questions.